Hello, and welcome to another episode of Winter is Writing. I can't believe it's episode 8 already. The last couple of months have gone by really quickly. So, all month I have been talking about character when it comes to writing. We've had some really interesting discussions, especially when Rosie Thor was on. And I've been writing a lot about how strong character development is really important for writing strong stories. And today, I don't know, I'm kind of salty about a recent Star Trek episode, and I wasn't gonna talk about it, but then the most recent episode of Game of Thrones happened, and I want to talk about it because they basically did similar things in these two episodes, one episode of Star Trek Discovery and one episode of Game of Thrones, but Game of Thrones did it so well, and Star Trek Discovery made me angry. Just ask my boyfriend. I kept pausing the show every few minutes and just screaming at the TV. So, specifically, I'm talking about Star Trek Discovery Season 2, Episode 13, Such Sweet Sorrow, Part 1, and Game of Thrones Season 8, Episode 2, A Night of the Seven Kingdoms. And obviously, there are going to be spoilers, so if you are catching this on the replay and you have not seen either of those episodes and you care, please stop and come back and rewatch it later. So, first I'm going to talk about the Star Trek episode. It, basically is an hour of the characters saying their sweet goodbyes to each other while there's a lot of background tension, we know the end is nigh kind of a situation, but none of them are actually doing anything constructive to move forward. There's maybe a little bit. And it was all the more frustrating because at the beginning of the follow-up episode to that, episode 14, all of a sudden the ticking time bomb of a clock is present, and they're all scrambling in the first few minutes of the episode to get their shit together. And I'm like, y'all should have been doing that while you were saying your forlorn goodbyes to each other. Because, duh. I hate it when episodes do stupid logic things like that. It's if you have a very short amount of time to save the universe, literally, the universe is at stake at the end of this season of Star Trek Discovery, maybe spend the time trying to make sure you save it instead of spending the whole time saying goodbye. Just, logic. Whereas in the Game of Thrones episode, it was really well done because at the beginning of the episode, you don't realize how close the White Walkers are to Winterfell. And over the course of the episode, it becomes clear that by dawn, the White Walkers are going to show up and everybody might be having their last night alive together. And what's really well done about the Game of Thrones episode is the interweaving of the escalating conflict and the sped up timeline over the course of the episode. Hi, Jason. Game of Thrones and Star Trek spoilers going on right now. So if you care about those, maybe catch the replay later. I just wanted to warn you. What's nice about the Game of Thrones episode is that it's escalating over the course of the episode and the timeline is getting quicker. But the other thing that's happening is there's a lot of character payoff in the way each character is spending what might be their last night alive is. And the biggest thing is Brienne, again, spoiler warning, Sir Jaime knights her. And that's a huge payoff that we didn't necessarily, we wanted, but we didn't necessarily expect would happen for her over the course of these 7, now the 8th season. And that was a really powerful moment to happen. in this kind of calm before the storm episode. Whereas in the Star Trek episode, the characters were just kind of like, we're probably going to die tomorrow. Let's make out and say goodbye. Nah. But there wasn't like character payoff. Like, for instance, if two characters on Star Trek who have had like a love interest relationship over the past 2 seasons, if they had never actually like consummated their relationship, and then they finally did that before they were about to die, that would have been more interesting and more of like a payoff. It's kind of like what they did with Arya Stark in the Game of Thrones episode. And I just like, it really bothered me how all of these characters on Star Trek knew that they had stuff to do to get done, but they literally spent like the whole episode just saying goodbye to each other. And I was so frustrated. I'm like, move the story forward. And as I was watching the final episode of Star Trek, there were 2 key plot points in that episode that I'm like, now that you should have built up to that in the previous episode and given us like a punch in the gut moment of conflict and sudden reversal for the end of the episode to like propel us and leave a cliffhanger. Like, I think cliffhangers are great. Cliffhangers are usually the midpoint of a story, and like talked about that last month with Rosie, how midpoints are where like the conflict increases and usually there's a reversal. Something drastically changes the nature of the story and it re-engages the audience going forward. So like in the Star Wars A New Hope, that was when the Millennium Falcon finally leaves Tatooine and is captured by the Death Star. It's like, yes, it's the same story, but the nature of the immediacy of what's happening completely changes. And I just loved how the Game of Thrones episode, episode 2 of season 8, continually advanced the plot, escalated the conflict, advanced character relationships in a really satisfying way, and most of them were actually payoffs. So like finally getting to see Jamie see Bran after however many years, that was really interesting. I just love how, you know, Bran's the three-eyed raven now, and he doesn't necessarily have feelings about what Jamie did to him. But even so, the way he just like stone cold stares at Jamie and is ready to do things like an adult and like get stuff done. I love that. That was really interesting and engaging. So basically, long story short, Game of Thrones did an incredible job of having the calm before the storm. There's going to be a huge battle at Winterfell against the White Walkers and all the dead. And the build-up to that moment was great. So much payoff with all of the characters and advancing of the relationships. Like, I thought the scene between Sansa and Khaleesi was excellent, but was cut too short. Their conflict is super interesting, and I hope we have enough time over the rest of the season to get more payoff from that. So yeah, that's kind of like my spiel. I wasn't going to talk about the Star Trek episode at all, but then seeing the Game of Thrones episode do such a phenomenally better job of how characters interact before they're probably all going to die kind of a situation. Star Trek was just annoyed the crap out of me, and Game of Thrones did a phenomenal job. So I thought I'd present that. And for those of you who don't watch either show, if you're like interested in this kind of stuff, it might be interesting. I'd be curious to know your thoughts if you just watched those 2 single episodes without any sort of context. I know it'd be super confusing, but I think Game of Thrones gives you a lot more context in the moment and pays it off and escalates it than the Star Trek episode. I think you'd be lost if you watched Star Trek independently, but if you just watched the Game of Thrones episode, you'd be like, oh, these people know each other. Things are happening. This has meaning to it, right? Whereas the Star Trek one, I'm like, I'm not really in love with too many of these characters yet. So yeah. So that was kind of all I wanted to talk about today. If, as I'm wrapping up this month about character, I'll probably do another blog post next week. If there are things that I have not talked about yet in relationship to character development, please let me know, either by going to accountabilitymuse.com/winteriswriting and filling out my question feedback form, or popping a comment in this Facebook Live, or direct messaging me also works. I would love to talk about what you guys are interested in. So, and for those of you catching this replay, if you want me to talk more about current TV shows and stuff, or movies, I actually regret not doing a reaction video to my and Rosie seeing the Star Wars Rise of Skywalker trailer. I think that would have been fun. There were a lot of feelings there. I'm super excited. Anyways, that's kind of it for today. Let me know if you guys have any specific questions about character, and I'll see you next week. Bye.